Hello and welcome to the EDHRECast, where we're all about Commander, data, and dad jokes. I'm Joey Schultz and I'm joined by my puntastic co-hosts. Up first, he's looking for a way to turn instants into creatures so that he can literally personify the card Personify. It's Matt Morgan.
So Joey, I told my wife that I had just burnt 2,000 calories in an hour. She was less than impressed though when I told her it was because I burnt a pan of brownies that I'd left in the oven.
Oh man. No, now I don't want to record. I want some brownies now, dude. We might have to put this on pause real quick, actually.
Well, it's a good way to score some brownie points, too, if you want to make some sweets for my wife, too.
Up next, he wants to evoke a card with Convoke, but that provoked me to revoke it. It's Dana Roach.
I went to air up one of my car tires at the gas station this morning, and I actually had to put a quarter into the air compressor to get it to work. Inflation is getting out of control.
No, dang it, goodness. Well done.
Dana, I would give you a penny for your thoughts on the economy and how everything's airing up.
We've already filled up too much airtime with this joke.
That's true. That is true.
That's great. Okay, guys, in this episode, what we're doing here this week, we're reacting to some hot takes. We solicited our patrons over at patreon.com/EDHRECast to give us some spicy takes about various cards in the format, the direction that Magic is headed, to see where it is that we land on those maybe against the grain type of ideas out there.
Yeah, well, let's get right into it, because the first one, I feel like this is a really hot take or a cold take, depending on who you ask these days. It's super common. I've seen this conversation come up, but we wanted to tackle it here. So the hot take is, I don't care how iconic it is, but Sol Ring should be a game changer. What do you guys think?
I understand the logic from a power perspective completely. Like, first of all, I would say I think everyone, no matter your thoughts on whether or not it should be on the list, would agree that, like, purely based on power level, Sol Ring absolutely should be and is a game changer. It's one of the strongest things you can do is play a Sol Ring in Commander. Even late in the game, like you're coming out mana ahead for doing so. I usually am not bothered to see it, pop up even like on turn 8 or something. However, my argument, and I've used this analogy before and I will use it again here, is Sol Ring is this one weird thing that everyone can have access to. It's the only card of that power level that's cheap because it's been printed so many times. It's that like expensive feeling piece of power that everyone can play. It's the green monster in Fenway Park that just changes the game. If you have too many of them, it becomes a circus, but like I myself like this one weird thing that everyone has a chance to experience.
I feel that. My thing here is that you can't half-ass this. To me, I think you can only either ban Sol Ring or leave it as it is. I don't think it makes sense as a game changer personally. And that comes down to like the purpose of the game changers being like a communication tool. If you tell me that your deck has a Sol Ring in it, I don't think I've gained any new information from that compared to if you tell me your deck has a Necropotence in it. Like I personally go back and forth about whether Farewell should be a game changer. But I can at least say that I certainly do gain some info about the type of game that you're in for when you say that there's a Farewell in your deck.
Sure. And
I don't gain that information from a Sol Ring. So there's some practical realities that to me think that like game changer status doesn't make sense for Sol Ring. I think it's either one or the other in terms of ban or leave it where it is. So Dana, I ultimately side with where you're at. Yeah. Matt, do you feel the same or do you have different feelings?
I think it feels to me so much like kind of the cat's out of the bag type of situation with Sol Ring. Like if we could go back 10, 15 years and make Sol Ring banned, anything like that, I think would be super, super different than trying to do that now. Doing it now, like you're trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube, it's impossible to do. It's so hard to untangle that because it has gotten to this level of iconic that Lightfoot, our Discord member, said, yeah, it absolutely is iconic. And I think if you backtrack on that now, that causes more harm than good. I agree in theory, 100%. But in execution, Joey, I think you put it really well. Either you ban it or you just keep it where it is. I don't think there's a healthy middle ground that everybody will agree on otherwise.
Yeah. And I know a lot of folks will say, well, the solution could be like, oh, you make it a game changer and then you change the game changer threshold or things like that too. But to me, it is, again, just like in terms of like what this offers.
But if you do that specifically, if you do that specifically for Sol Ring, are you changing anything? Because like, if you make it a game changer, then okay, now you can have 4 game changers in bracket 3. That doesn't actually change anything at all.
Right.
Yeah, it just become like a lateral move.
Yeah.
And again, I get where this is coming from. We actually get tons of emails about this. And a quick reminder that none of us are on the Commander format panel. Oh. But yeah, like just continuing to do things because that's how they've always been done. If something's iconic or has a breadth of history or something like that, tradition, those are not my favorite reasons to continue doing something. I do prefer to stop and reevaluate for sure. I just, in this case, don't end up seeing game changer status on this card as a thing that would lead to an enhancement in pregame player alignment. I also don't think that turning it into a game changer would encourage differences in deck building. I don't think that it would encourage players to take it out of their decks either, for instance. I wish it did, but I don't think that would actually end up happening, just thinking about the practical nature of things here.
Sure.
And for me, for a card like this, it ends up becoming either go hard or go home. But then the practicality stops me there too, because, banning it, making millions of decks technically now suddenly contain a banned card all at once would also have consequences that wouldn't be good, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm kind of waxing philosophical here, but ultimately I get the logic here. I just feel like the practical reality is outweighing things for me. So I end up understanding, but disagreeing with our first hot take here.
Okay. Yeah, I do as well. Before we go any further, we have a few shout outs to do here. And we're excited to be teamed up again with Dragon Shield in 2026. If you went to MagicCon Atlanta last fall, you got early access to Dragon Shield's Landfall series sleeves. So given Vegas is right around the corner and the Ravnica Guild sleeves are due soon, fingers crossed, they might be available at Vegas.
Be sweet.
And their sleeve crafter tool is also a great way to make custom sleeves for you or your friends. Don't tell Matt and Joey, but I'm planning on giving them sleeves with my face on them for their birthdays this year. And you can do the same. And by the same, I mean give people sleeves with my face on them. Just use the promo code EDHREC in all lowercase at dragonshield.com to get 5% off your next purchase. It helps the show, and it helps your card stay safe.
This show is also brought to you by you, our brilliant patrons at patreon.com/EDHRECast, who provided all the hot takes that we're talking about in this very episode. So all of your support in any form means the world to us. Subscribe, leave us a review. Clark the Thumbless gave us his thumbs. You can give us yours too. And of course, your support on Patreon goes so far. It gives you access to cool perks like our exclusive Discord, where we got all of these cool hot takes, or our challenge to stats spreadsheet, and of course, Patreon shoutouts. So let's get that shout out here. Mina Campbell, thank you so much for being a patron. Thank you for listening, for watching, for supporting, and we hope you're having a good one.
But another thing that we're really excited to announce is coming up next week, actually. If you like that jacket that Dana's wearing right now, fancy, handsome-looking jacket with Architect logo on it, you can now get that. So we are launching the Space Cow Media store next week, March 18th. So we'll have the URL ready to go for you all next week. We'll announce it on next week's episode. But until then, I just want everybody to get as excited as I am, because this is something we've been working on really hard with the teams behind EDHREC, Architect, Cardsphere. We've all come together to launch a merch store with some of the best gear that we just like wearing ourselves because it's comfortable. So keep an eye out for that website coming out next week, March 18th.
Okay, guys, let's dive back into our hot takes here. The next one comes to us from our patron, Alta Biscuit, who said, Modern Horizons was a greater net negative on the game than Universes Beyond. Of the hot takes we have assembled, this is actually one of my favorites. I'm very excited to discuss it with you all. Where do we feel about the net negatives on the game of Magic with regards to stuff like Modern Horizons 3, stuff like that, and the Universes Beyond adaptations and IP crossovers we've been seeing?
So I don't know if this is my favorite hot take that we got, but it is the one that I wanted to talk about the most. This one, I 1000% agree with this. It's really weird calling a set like Modern Horizons or just any Magic set a net negative, but I do feel that maybe this set did more harm than good. And when it comes to how it kind of made the rest of the format adapt to it, when you have a set like Modern Horizons 3 that just is so blatantly pushed and the card power level is so astronomically high, players kind of have no choice but to play into what they're putting out there, and it's going to push out all those old sets. I have had the attitude since the first Modern Horizons, and every single one, all 1, 2, and 3, have only reinforced this attitude that I've kind of come to find myself adopting, where Commander now is a rotating format, and it rotates every time a Modern Horizons style set comes out. To me, for Commander, that is a net negative. I 100% agree that this is not necessarily the best thing. It's not all good when it comes to Modern Horizons 3 and these types of cards.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it did two things. It filled the format with a bunch of cards that are I don't want to say the word auto include, but like every white deck is better with Esper Sentinel in it. Like really, like from a power perspective, it is. Every green deck is probably better with a Yavimaya Cradle of Growth. Every artifact deck is probably better with an Urza Saga. Like a bunch of ubiquitous cards that make your deck just better generically. And it has a bunch of cards that were strict upgrades over existing already powerful cards. Like it edged so many cards out and became such a large part of the format that you have to intentionally choose to not run that Esper Sentinel. Otherwise, like I said, it would go in every single deck.
Well, like you missed the cards that are probably the most pushed, and that's bringing back the MDFCs from Modern Horizons 3.
Yeah, right.
Like that's the biggest offender in my mind.
It does cause a ubiquity aspect to it too. I definitely see, like, there's a lot to critique about direct to modern sets for sure. I do personally softly disagree with this take, though. Modern Horizon sets, and especially Modern Horizons 3, probably are too powerful, but I don't think that means that they end up being worse for the game than some of the consequences and dominoes that have fallen as a result of Universes Beyond crossovers.
Yeah.
When I weigh up the benefits and downsides of those compared to the benefits and downsides of UB, I think the scales are just slightly heavier on UB, but I really do appreciate this take. It's a good reason to stop and think hard to make sure that we're not just getting swept up into a narrative that trends a lot online. I think one of the issues that I end up having with Universes Beyond stuff is how it makes Magic's own IP a little bit harder to come back to successfully without it impacting people's jobs, is kind of my thing.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
Universes Beyond crossovers do a lot to bring a new audience of players in, but then the company sort of demands that same level of success over and over and over again. And once you crash back into, well, we've run out of runway, there are fewer IPs for us to adapt now. And our own lore here in Magic has been neglected a lot. It hasn't gotten quite as much water as the Universes Beyond plant has, which could make it feel weaker because the numbers look smaller. And then the big wigs start looking at the designers and saying, why aren't you doing as good a job anymore? And things like that. I worry about people's jobs in that way.
I think, and this is not me saying that the Universes Beyond has had some negative effects, like, because it absolutely has. I mean, we look at the last two of the last three, with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that just came out, and that was kind of a flop. Like I went to some LGS's over release weekend and pre-release weekend, and they said the numbers were like a third, if not a quarter, of the numbers they saw for lore when Eclipsed.
Yeah.
So like, I with what happened with Ninja Turtles and what happened with Spider-Man, where like these sets just aren't resonating. They're trying to take anything and everything. It feels like, and obviously that's not the case when you're actually like in Wizard's office, but the failure rate for these sets is so high that like, is it worth it leveraging some sales now for like a worse sentiment around these Universes Beyond sets? That's where I feel like the risk is kind of teetering on, like, it's not worth the reward.
Right, it's a great short-term plan because it really, like, clearly it's profitable.
Sure.
That's why the company's doing it. But it's a great short-term plan for a game that I want to last a long time, and I don't know that it's fortifying the roots quite as much. So that makes me worried about designers. It makes me worried about game stores. I love that you pointed that out. That's something I was going to bring up too. But also, I am a little bit worried about how it affects artists as well. We've already seen that there are certain artists who get affected by Universes Beyond because, like, a Marvel license, for instance, makes it so that they cannot sell prints of their own work anymore since those pieces now belong to Marvel instead. It's stuff like that too that also has ramifications that I pay attention to with Universes Beyond as well. So the power creep of Modern Horizon set, absolutely worth critiquing. But in terms of net negatives, there's some of the other stuff that branches out. Those other ripple effects still end up tipping the scales a little bit more towards UB for me. But I really appreciate this take again to be like, cool, let's not just like blindly go along with a narrative. Let's stop and think critically about it, because there's a lot to critique around with Magic's own IP and the sets that it produces too. So I really appreciate this one coming forward.
Well, up next we have one from Johnny's Gay Pride Mate. And I'm curious to hear some takes on this one from you two. The Commander of the old days pre-2018 was not as fun as boomers like myself remember it being. And we all played back in that period of time, so I'm wondering what you two think about this.
I do want to clarify that Lenny, this is our buddy Lenny in Discord, did say boomers like myself. That's quote directly, and not Dana calling himself a boomer, which is also true. I knew that would be confusing for listeners.
which also is true, yeah.
Yeah, so just to make sure that the quote is understood there.
Yes, that's fair.
Sorry, Dana, I have to call you old once per episode. You know the drill.
The beard gives me away.
So I think that the argument, because I love playing like the 2018 era Commander. That to me was like a really, really good era, a really good time to be playing. But so some of the arguments that I know Lenny put out there talking about some of the rules changes, like the tuck rule that a lot of players now don't remember or just knew was a thing, where you could cast Spell Crumple, for example, where it would put commanders on the bottom library or shuffle them in, stuff like that. You would actually do that with commander cards. So they changed the rules several years ago. I want to say like 2015, 2014 for that. And then the clones could kill commanders because the legend rule was different back then. there's a lot of rules that have changed over the years. I don't agree with this, but the reason that I do is because in my mind, and this kind of ties into a couple of hot takes that we have to talk about later, the game was just so much simpler and so much more straightforward. The board clutter, games didn't take 4 hours, like, or sometimes they did, but like sometimes it's by design because you just didn't have all the toys laying around. Like it felt to me, and I think Dana, this is where you're going to come in. You had to kind of do a little bit more work in order to make decks kind of function the way that you wanted them to. But for me, just like the cards were so much less complex. Cards today are so wordy and they do so many things that it just like the time investments to play a game takes so much longer now, it feels, than it did back then. Just being smoother, being so much easier to track board states. I enjoyed that a lot. It was so much more straightforward and just needlessly complicated like today's game can be.
Yeah, this is very much a 6 of one, half dozen of the other thing for me. There were things I appreciate about the old days. Primarily the fact that, like, with a few exceptions, Sharoom, maybe Rafiq, when you sat down, you looked around, you're like, okay, anyone could win this game. And the winner's gonna depend on, how well you built your deck and how well you played. Versus today, when I sit down and 3/4 of the time I look around and like, well, that person's going to win unless we focus all our energies on not letting them win because of the card they have in the command zone. And that happened much less back then, and I miss that. Sitting down and feeling like this is wide open and anybody who built a good deck has a chance to win, versus like we all have to keep that person from winning because that commander is going to win the game regardless of how good they play or how good they've brewed that deck, because it has 9 lines of text, each of which feeds the line on it that comes afterwards.
And this isn't to say that like anybody's wrong either for having a preference. Like I like games today too, like I did back then. But to your point, Dana, it felt like Wizards' reactions like, oh man, Rafiq really is a problem. Well, what if every commander was just as good, if not better than Rafiq?
Everyone had a Rafiq.
That seems to have been, and that's just game design in general. Like games have to get more powerful, otherwise you're never going to buy new cards. I understand that, but like it just felt so accelerated starting in like 2020 moving forward. It just got so much more worse. Like the Chulanes of the world and the Corvolds, and just like then it only just got worse and worse.
Joe the Unifier is the commander I was going to put on screen for Dana's example there. That's one of those commanders that, you've got to keep it in check or else the game just ends immediately. Right. This is another favorite take from our patrons. This sparked so much discussion in the Discord, which is amazing. That's exactly what a hot take should do, right? Is create some chatter. Because like if everyone agrees with it, then it's not a hot take,
Yeah.
And I actually find myself more parts agreeing with Lenny and slightly disagreeing with you guys. More than anything, I appreciate this take for the opportunity to discuss rose-colored glasses. Nostalgia is such an unreliable narrator that papers over past bumps in the road. And in the discussion around this one, various things were pointed out that might feel unsavory by today's standards, like the tuck rule, like weird mana restriction rules, like playing clones to kill commanders, or like red and white Boros colors having garbage card draw and being less viable in the format for years. There were a lot of things in the past that people complained about at the time, but that nowadays are details that our memory omits sometimes. Or like, frankly, Matt, in what you were talking about there, you mentioned game time. I believe I had the complete opposite experience to what you described. My games way back when were significantly longer, like hours longer than the games of today, because, it was like 5 damage at a time and lots of board stalls, compared to the games of today where a Joda threatens to oops the entire table all in one go, or win conditions are a lot more reliable and things like that. I definitely agree about things being more complicated these days. There are a lot of commanders and cards out there that just like resemble flowcharts for sure.
Yeah.
But in terms of game time, I feel I have a lot more 4-hour slogs in the past than I do in the present. And that's just one of those negative details, like Lenny is mentioning here, that we run the risk of glossing over with our modern day lenses. There just are some of those details in the past that we forget about and that we might not enjoy as much if they were to return in the commander of today.
And I will back up what Joey said too. Like, I complain about the commanders, and I don't like the current state of what people have in the command zone. But I also didn't like the fact that Boros couldn't draw cards, 10 years ago.
Right.
And that like green, I remember people running Desert Twister in decks because like green had so few ways to interact with someone else's permanents and like things like that. The game's just so much better off. Or the mana base, like everyone's mana base is so much better. You're not running, like check lands were like the 3rd best land you could have in your deck back then. Like that's changed. Like mana base is so much more smoother, and that just makes the game more fun to play. A lot of things have improved too.
Yeah, I feel like saying it wasn't as fun as we remember. Like, no, it can be as fun as we remember it being. And like, it doesn't have to take away from how the format was back then or how the format is now. Like, we can just say like the format's different, because it absolutely is, but neither person is wrong for preferring 2018, 2011, 2015, or 2016, whatever, to today. Like, everything's different. And that's fine. Like, you don't have to, it's not a zero-sum game to like say, oh man, I really enjoyed games back then.
Matt, I agree. And I feel confident Lenny would agree too. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I don't think anyone's saying it is zero sum. Whichever one you prefer is the one you prefer.
Yep.
I think the point I love so much about this is that it was a great invitation to remember that, if we love something, warts and all, it's wise to make sure we're remembering all the warts.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next take. So I'm curious what you all think about this. So a couple people had similar takes that I want to kind of read here together. One said a person's, quote, silly, goofy deck, unquote, is more likely to actually just be annoying. And then another person said funny plays should still move the game forward. I'm tired of them effectively being a stacks without the person realizing it. This one is getting pretty aggressive, but actually I've had some similar experiences that I want to hear your guys' thoughts on too.
Thank you to Buster for Joestar and MX Kale for these takes. I love these. This is, I 100% agree that we as players get blind spots, and a thing that's funny to us may not be as funny to other people. So yeah, I find myself decently on board with this.
So the difference I found, the hair that you split for these is how much the silly, goofy deck forces you to participate in the silly, funny, goofy thing. And when you're forcing the table to participate, that changes it to being annoying, I found most of the time. The most recent one I ran into was somebody whose deck was built around tutoring up and playing Knowledge Pool as quickly as possible.
That's no, get out of here.
and that forces everyone else to participate in your silly, funny, goofy deck, and maybe they didn't want to. And for those who don't know, Knowledge Pool is a 6-mana artifact. It has Imprint. When it enters the battlefield, each player exiles the top 3 cards of their library. And whenever a player casts a spell from their hand, that player exiles it. And if the player does, they may cast another non-land card exiled with Knowledge Pool without paying that card's mana cost. So any spell you cast, you're basically substituting that spell for the spell in Knowledge Pool and putting that spell in Knowledge Pool so that you're just not playing your deck anymore.
There you go.
So I think that's where the difference lies almost entirely, is whether or not you're making other people do that thing versus you just doing a silly, funny thing.
Well, and I really like the line that they're drawing between, like, is it silly and goofy, or is it like annoying? Is it making people, like you said, Dana, play along? Like, I think this is probably a big thing that folks get a negative taste in their mouths about bracket 1 decks, because they often think like, well, it's just going to be stupid stuff that like nobody else thinks is funny. Like, you can still do these bracket 1, these fun things, and still at least like make sure you're accomplishing something. You're not just spinning your wheels, or you're telling a story. Like I have a bracket 1 Noctis list, and it's the Noctis Heir Apparent, and it's just telling the story of everything that happens in the game. But like, it's not forcing anybody to do things outside the norm in a Magic game too. I'm just expressing it in a different way. So yeah, I agree. It's just finding that fine line, because it is really hard to tell. And like, to me, this is going to be mostly playgroup dependent, because I think some of the interactions that like some of my friends have are going to be very, very different than Dana, you and your friends. And like, we know each other's friends like really well. Like, we all have seen each other, spend time together. But yeah, it's really, really playgroup dependent, with like what is going to be funny for one group could be like the worst nightmare for another playgroup.
It's also one of those things that maybe is kind of mood dependent. Like,
yeah,
you just might not be in the mood that day to play that kind of deck, and assuming that everyone's going to want to be in the mood to play that kind of thing is something that you probably shouldn't do.
A lot of the red chaos cards are probably the biggest culprits of this, I would guess, because those are the ones that are most likely to read as really funny, and we don't expect red to be a lockdown type of color. But, I'm thinking of like Possibility Storm or the Scramble Versus and the Planar Chaos.
The Warp Worlds, you know who you are.
Well, yeah, I guess maybe that's actually what kind of makes the line blurry here sometimes. Like, where the card Planar Chaos makes us all flip coins to see whether our spells resolve, and then Possibility Storm is kind of like that Knowledge Pool example where it turns your spells into other stuff. Those will like look funny, but then the actual end result when they're in play is often like a board stall, which is what I think our patrons mean here by, things that look funny accidentally being stacks or accidentally being annoying.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, that Warp World example thing, like, yeah, we have a friend with a Warp World deck where the point is that he's looping that spell as many times as possible to reset all permanents over and over again, because his whole deck is designed with things in it that will deal a whole bunch of damage when they enter. So then that actually does end up being a win con. It does actually move things forward. It just also, as you said, Dana, it involves everyone at the table.
Right.
And of course, it's also possible that like that combo will stall out, so it's non-deterministic, which I guess also makes it more fair technically. But I mean, like regardless, those I think maybe do feel like two different kind of flavors of goofiness to me, one of which I'm more game for than the other. But even the one with the plan is still like kind of the thing that functions best when the entire table is in the know, so that then, you know, someone isn't accidentally imposing their version of fun onto other people. Chaos, I think, is a big example of this, but not the only example. Frankly, I've definitely been guilty of imposing my version of fun on other people too, and I always feel really embarrassed about it afterwards, so fair cop. But Dan, I really like your point a lot, recognizing the impact on others, especially if it is literally involving them having to take certain actions or whatever. Plus the core advice here from our patrons that they're pointing out is that, you know, a funny thing isn't an end goal, and that decks that can imagine an ending objective are usually much cooler. I think that's fantastic advice. Fellas, I'm realizing here it's about time for us to challenge the stats. We've been recording for a while here, and we've got several more hot takes to look at. But first, let's just take a quick break to look at some cards that we think might be over or underplayed, according to all that data on EDHREC. Guess what? Our favorite deck builder, Architect, just released a really cool new feature, uploading custom cards. A lot of folks like to homebrew or invent cards for house rules or just test out their own game designs, and Architect now has a place where you can customize your own card, name, cost, types, text box, and put it right into your deck, where it will be treated just like any other card would. You can make a card that is totally blank or upload your very own custom image of your custom card. And yes, when you make your designs, not only will they count towards all of your deck's stats, such as tracking things like your mana curve, your pips, your types, to make sure that all of the stats of your deck are accurate, to make sure you're getting the very best deck information, but also all the designs that you invent or upload are usable in the Architect playtester, which is of course the very best playtester in the biz. What's really exciting is that this new feature has also laid the groundwork for Architect to support uploading alters of cards too, so if you want to upload your own custom images of pre-existing cards, the fine folks at Architect have even more stuff cooking, so let them know if that's something that you'd like to see in the future. Check out our deck lists at architect.com/EDHRECast to keep up with all of our brews and try making your own custom cards while you're at it. That's archidekt.com/EDHRECast.
My challenge is brought to us by listener Ethan Glazer this week, and Ethan writes, I came across an interesting realization when looking into the Architect deck building contest for March. It looks like Taval the Balance Scale has just over 27,000 decks in EDHREC, but only 54 of them include the card Mimic Vat. This is 0.2% inclusion rate. And Mimic Vat works surprisingly well with Taval's Leave the Graveyard ability. People forget that Mimic Vat doesn't exile instead of going to the yard, rather it exiles after the creature goes to the graveyard. So if you have any non-token creature die while both Taval and Mimic Vat are on the battlefield, you can trigger Taval's ability, and additionally Mimic Vat is just a good value card in general. Yeah, I mean, like, this is kind of perfect. You anything that comes into anything of yours that dies, you can just put it under the Mimic Vat to get that trigger, and the next thing of yours that dies, you can do the same thing again. If something good of your opponent's dies, you can grab that, but like, just using it in general the way it's intended is a really good bit of value, and the fact that every time you use it on one of your creatures, you get a free zombie trigger is kind of amazing.
Mimic Vat is one of my favorite cards that gets overlooked so much. Just when you have something under there, even for the instant speed blocker of it or the cool tricks you can play with it, it's always a treat. You feel so great when you have a Mimic Vat doing stuff, and that's a great home for it. So yeah, I love that. What a great listener challenge. My challenge will be up next. Let's talk about the new 5-color Ashling, who is already rank 95 in the data with over 14,000 decks to her name. This is the 5-color commander who lets you evoke your elementals, and whenever you sacrifice a non-token elemental creature, you can make a copy of that creature for the turn. It will sacrifice itself unless you pay extra mana to keep it per Ashling's ability. The card that I think could stand to see more play in Ashling decks here is Luminous Broodmoth, which is showing up currently in only 513 of the 14,000 Ashling decks out there. Luminous Broodmoth says, whenever your creatures die, if they don't have flying, bring them back into play with a flying counter on it. This is not an elemental itself, but it does bring them back. So you evoke a creature here with Ashling, say the card Belonging, which makes 3 tokens when it enters. Evoke sacrifices that creature, so then Ashling makes a copy of it, you get the token copy of the card Belonging, and its ETB ability makes 3 more 1/1s. Then Luminous Broodmoth says, hey, the original card didn't have flying, I'll bring it back with a flying counter. So then you get the original card back permanently with flying, and you get its ETB ability a 3rd time for 3 more 1/1s. All of that and Luminous Broodmoth is just really good board wipe insurance, like it brings your commander back into play if someone else destroys all creatures, I would say consider giving this one a shot. 500 decks out of 14,000 decks seems too low to me.
Yeah, just another episode where my card sphere want list is just getting more and more crowded because all these synergies and reminding me that cards just exist. But with that, I'm going to wrap us up then with my challenge for the week. So this week, I really like this card. It kind of got forgotten about a little bit just because it was in a set that wasn't super popular, but it interacts really well with some of these new commanders, especially these firebending commanders that we got back in Avatar: The Last Airbender, stuff like Ozai the Phoenix King especially. So that was the firebending commander. It's Rakdos, 7/7, trample, firebending, 4 in haste. But the key ability here is if you would lose unspent mana, that mana becomes red instead. And then Ozai has flying indestructible as long as you have 6 or more unspent mana. But the card that I really, really like here is Full Throttle. This is that double combat spell, 6 mana for a sorcery. After this main phase, there are 2 additional combat phases at the beginning of each combat this turn. Untap all creatures that attacked this turn. So the reason I really like this is just with firebending, you can just basically just keep generating more and more mana and then keep casting more and more extra combat spells. I just really like what this is doing. So Full Throttle currently is only showing up in 16% of these decks, especially with Ozai the Phoenix King. Another card, if you really like this, it's a little more expensive though, is Seize the Day, which is just a untapped target creature. Then you get additional combat and also has flashback. So you can basically just like chain all of these together with Ozai. I really like all these. If you're just trying to generate a ton of mana and just go to town with these Rakdos combat damage decks, extra combats are just absolutely fantastic, especially with Ozai, because you make the mana in your combat step. You don't lose that mana to just keep all the fun going. So absolutely give a second look to these extra combat spells in this Ozai the Phoenix King deck, because not very many people are doing that. And I just think that's a super powerful interaction that people are kind of sleeping on.
Full Throttle is one of those red cards that I am very afraid to see across the table from me.
It's super powerful, yeah.
Challenge of Stats has been brought to you by Card Sphere, as Matt mentioned. It's the best way to turn cards you don't want into cards you do want. I've been building an entire Death Leaper Terror Weapon deck using just Card Sphere, and it's taken me like 2 weeks to get all but 3 cards in, and the 3 that I'm waiting for might well be my mailbox by the time we stop recording. Just go to cardsphere.com/EDHRECast to get started today.
Okay, doke, fellas. On to our next hot take here. This comes to us from our patron, Pax809, who says, I actually don't think board wipes are the reason why games take longer. I find the absence of options makes players play their turns faster, but the amount of cards that cantrip or generate value gives players more options and makes them take longer turns considering those options.
I mean, it's decision paralysis. It's decision paralysis. Like every card does 10 things these days, like kind of like we were talking about a minute ago. I do think that board wipes still make games take significantly longer. A well-timed one definitely can elongate a game. But just in general, this is kind of a point that I was talking about a little bit when we were talking about like the pre-boomer commander. Every card does a thing. For a while there was every card also makes a treasure and you have to keep track of all those, or every card draws a card. Yeah, I do think that just games in general are more complex than they were even a couple of years ago.
I think, first of all, there's the thing where, like, I run less board wipes, or at least I started running less board wipes because we were playing a lot online. And I still play online enough that, like, I don't run them because it makes for a bad spell table experience to be routinely wiping the board. And so having started doing that, and I used to run 2 to 3, and I dropped down to 1 or 2 in most of my decks just to, like, make online games not unpleasant to play against. And I've just kind of maintained that. Additionally, though, we've gotten so many board wipes that can become one-sided board wipes that I found I really don't need to run board wipes that aren't in some way one-sided, or at least able to be flexed to primarily be one-sided, like, say, an Austere Command or something. So if I'm running a board wipe, it's a board wipe that's going to primarily leave my stuff alone and mostly hit everybody else. And that does the job well enough for me. So I can still solve the problem while also not resetting the game to 0 and kind of slowing things up.
Yeah, stuff like Wave Goodbye. Like there's so many modal board wipes nowadays that like you can wipe pretty much everybody else's board except for yourself, and then like it turns into like a win condition, like it used to be with Insurrection,
right,
stuff
absolutely,
like that.
Yes.
So yeah, I don't think that board they can, like I said, but I don't think they always will.
It's interesting, the complexity thing that you mentioned, Matt. I definitely agree that the game has gotten more complex. I don't know that I have felt that it is slower as a result of that. Like I wish I could agree with this one. I really like it, and I do think that PAX is onto something here. That like non-deterministic value engines do be spinning their wheels for sure. But Dana, you and I track our games for data episodes at the end of each year, and the ones of my games that go to 20 turns are the ones that had over 4 board wipes per game. And I guess ultimately, I don't know that I feel the value engines of today, they feel a little bit more like Joda and Voya win the game with their value engines rather than Brago spinning his wheels with his value engine. That feels to me like the kind of commander design that we get to do today. When commanders do the thing, it ends the game these days, tends to be my impression. But it is a good, we've said before on the show plenty of times that value isn't victory. So it's good to be attentive to that. But I do notice that the games that take the longest tend to be the ones that had a lot more cleaning up moments affecting the turn count. And not just the turn count, but the time count.
Yeah, definitely the same thing here. So up next, we have kind of two combined or adjacent takes. One's from Gojira Tickles. Hot take. TMNT aesthetic is garbage. However, the set mechanics and designs far exceed the creative failure that was our first visit to the plane of New York City.
Our first visit to the plane of New York City, of course, being Spider-Man.
Gotcha. In the second kind of adjacent one here is from Matt E. And this combination is precisely why it may be the worst set of all. Making great cards from a garbage aesthetic is bad, actually. Yeah, I mean, I joked about how bad the pizza lands are, but there's a handful of cards that are just kind of repulsive in the set.
Repulsive? Oh, man.
Yeah, I definitely, yeah. And I don't know why that was a choice that was made. I know there's some consistency with the source material where like the pizza was always kind of a little bit sloppy and cheap looking, and that there's an intentional throwback to that, but it doesn't seem like a choice that I would have made when I'm trying to make people play with these cards, I guess. I understand that reaction, and I do agree this is a solid set mechanically, but man, there's a lot of ugly stuff in here.
I mean, the basic lands, that pizza land just gave me a visceral reaction. I really struggle to say this is the worst set of all time. Is it not pleasant to look at? Sure. Like maybe visually, it's a big miss. Spider-Man mechanically was an absolute just train wreck, and Wizards has all but confirmed that themselves even. But like, it's also really hard to like, man, Fallen Empires, some of those sets of yore that like were genuinely bad. I don't think that they're as bad as like, I think it's safe to say like between Ninja Turtles and Spider-Man, 2 of the worst sets of the modern era, maybe. That might be a good way to describe it. But also like, I think people are very quick to kind of forget how exactly bad Aether Drift was, folks. That set was also very bad.
Well, I think if you remove the nostalgia from it as well, there's a lot of not great pieces of art back on Magic early days too. Yeah, Homelands, Fallen Empires, Ice Age, those sets particularly. There's a lot of kind of clunky things that by today's standards wouldn't fly, or maybe not like everything gross, looked like it was like the pizza lands.
Yeah, well, like everything from back then looked like it was drawn on like wax paper. Like there was just like this fuzziness almost to it.
This is such an interesting combination here. I like Gojira Tickle's pointing out the first thing, the aesthetic they don't like, but the mechanics are actually interesting. I think it is absolutely fair to point out that honestly, some of the cards are compelling, but I appreciate the one-two punch here of the next one being like, yeah, but when Universes Beyond cards that you don't like the look of are compelling mechanically, we don't feel good about that either. The better those cards are, the more it feels weird to ignore them. It feels like you have to invite that tone break into your deck to keep up. And you almost do kind of wish that those sets would manage to be more insular and self-contained so that you could have a full just Spider-Man deck. And the fact that TMNT seems to have better mechanical cards means that we're going to have more of those tone breaks in our own decks if we want to keep up with like the types of things that decks are doing nowadays and like +1 counter decks and stuff like that.
But then again, but I guess the question that we go back to then is like, is that worse than Modern Horizons, where it's not a tone break, but you're basically being forced to play this card because mechanically it is so good, or the opportunity cost just doesn't exist, where you are basically being forced to play that, even though aesthetically it does make sense because it is still a traditional Magic card.
I think I just want to take a beat to acknowledge the feel bads. Like, plenty of folks just plain old like properties like TMNT, and they were excited to go get a deck, and it was expensive. Like, why is that pre-con so much money? Geez. But then they see a bunch of folks online or at a game store crapping on that set. And even here on this show, we're talking about that set in the context of people don't like this. And ultimately, that's alienating for the people who just spent all that money. That's alienating for the people who committed the sin of liking something. I hope all of those folks just know that we're going to be excited to play with you no matter what your deck is. We have critiques about it and concerns about the company's creative direction, and various aesthetic things might feel bleh. Like, we have a right to express those things. That's a big sticking point for sure. But ultimately, I want to make sure that I don't become incapable of seeing good things and stuff, even when I have creative disagreements with it. Like, however much you like something is more important than how much I dislike a thing. So I'm going to aim my critiques at the company to consider the long-term effects of some of these maneuvers and choices. And, I'll note that just some aesthetics are not going to be my vibe, whatever. But you will not ever catch me. You won't catch any of us aiming our criticism at our fellow Magic players who just like something. Even if I don't get it, it doesn't matter if I don't get it. Your joy is going to bring me some joy too.
And one thing that this is related to aesthetics too, that really came up with Ninja Turtles for me is I also feel like past UB products, even if the aesthetics have clashed with Magic, so like Doctor Who, for example. The aesthetics of a lot of those cards kind of clash with what we see of Magic. I still felt like Doctor Who was a significant enough property in terms of like how many folks loved it and how iconic it is, that it doesn't feel as odd seeing those cards pop up. Okay, it's Doctor Who, or it's Spider-Man, or it's Final Fantasy, or it's Lord of the Rings. Those all feel like they are large and respected and serious enough of an intellectual property that even if they look different, it's maybe not as jarring to see. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles feels really minor. Like, that feels like a strange thing, and it feels less like, here's this cool thing that we want to be part of the Magic universe, and it feels much more like, here's this thing that we were paid money to make part of the Magic universe, to me at least. Like, it feels, it's so lesser that I feel strange for me to see it there.
It would have made sense making that comparison though, Dana, to have maybe a few precons for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and then a full set for Doctor Who. I think that switch probably would have made a lot more sense because
absolutely,
like, there's so much more lore, and I do love Ninja Turtles. Like I said, I grew up watching that show. That was my favorite thing. I had all the toys. This should have resonated with me so much more than it did. I think having a pre-con environment for this Ninja Turtle set versus a full-blown standard legal probably would have made a big difference in the public reception of it too.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the tricky part of anything Universe Beyond. Like, the exact details of how this Universe Beyond set worked versus this Universe Beyond set worked. More to the point is just like the tone break is the thing that seems to be the driving point here. People like, some folks do not like all Universe Beyond products. Totally understand where they're coming from, but like, there is a gradient between Final Fantasy's aesthetic versus the Spider-Man aesthetic, and that line is being drawn a little bit more clearly for a whole bunch of folks. The point here being about like when those cards are good, and then it feels like you kind of can't ignore them as a result of that because that's what everyone is playing in those types of decks nowadays. That's a thing that it does make you kind of need to pay attention. From a consumer perspective, I look at a company that noticed that people didn't like when the cards were bad, and they want you to buy the cards. So then they made the cards better to force you to pay attention to the cards. As a consumer, I'm just like, yeah, I think that was kind of inevitable almost. And so maybe that affects how I make peace with it. Maybe some other folks find themselves at different spots on that journey. But that is the most interesting element of both of these takes to me, is that, like, the cards can be good, even with weird aesthetics. And of course they're going to be. That's what the company wants us to be talking about.
Okay, so what about our next take? So user Seth had a really good one that I agree with very much. It just says net decking isn't as horrible as people make it out to be. Sometimes you just need a base deck to build from or an idea to run off of.
Cosign. I'm on board, Seth. Love it.
So the big moment I had regarding net decking was years ago. There used to be a smaller podcast called Commander Social. And on that show, they were talking about a friend of theirs who played a ton of Magic, loved playing EDH, and absolutely detested deck building. For whatever reason, that person just hated brewing decks. So they would just look through deck sites and find something that looked cool and built that deck. And like, there's no more pure form of net decking than that. But if that person hates deck building, why should they have to deck build? to play this thing they want to build. I'm like, everyone likes different aspects of the thing they're doing. Maybe you love playing Warhammer, but like you don't like painting figures. Well, you shouldn't not. Why would you feel like you can't play Warhammer 40K if you just don't like or terrible at painting? If you love that, great, and it's an extra part of the hobby. I love building decks. This game wouldn't be nearly as fun for me if I couldn't do that. But just because somebody else doesn't do that doesn't mean like they shouldn't be able to enjoy the aspects of the game they do enjoy.
So the net decking argument and people bashing that's one thing that I wish we would have left back in Boomer Magic when people complained about net decking all the time. It was so common for people to be talking about that. Sometimes people are just busy. Not just do they not enjoy it, but like sometimes you just don't have time. And so buying a precon or just looking up, okay, what card should I be playing and starting with that's absolutely a valid way for people to build their decks. I think, and I know a lot of people say like, well, your EDHREC, of course, you all are going to, your EDHREC, of course you want people to net deck. Like we don't want people to net deck. We're simply showing them what they're building, but also, again, I guess back to the Modern Horizons 3 argument, sets like Modern Horizons 3 and Wizards of the Coast design in general, that's going to homogenize the format so much faster than Perfect Information ever could. So like people still like make their decisions, but some people just don't have the time to comb through every single search of cards. And like, it's totally valid if people just want to pull up a list, throw it together and go. That's totally valid.
Yeah, the way that Narcy is designed means you're playing a lot of sagas in that deck, and that's not because of a website reporting it. It's because of the way it was designed. Yeah. Right. I don't like the undercurrent of sometimes coming off of superior that can happen in like anti-net decking sentiment. It has that unfortunate undercurrent that at its worst, sometimes discussions like that get gatekeepy, and I don't really care for that. So yeah, I don't play Teamer a lot. I would like some help figuring out how to play Teamer sometimes, and if that involves a good starting point, cool. I'm glad that I had that starting point. That's my thing.
Yeah.
So I think we move now to our next hot take here. This is one that I've been also very excited to get to. It comes from our Discord member Tharja, who says, far too many decks are running ramp. If your commander needs other permanents to function, you should just be curving out instead. Dana, I'm gonna let you take this one because you've got a real fun story about this kind of thing.
So a few years ago, there was a content creator whose name I will not mention saying Mana Rocks are a scam, and you should just run a bunch more lands. And there's a handful of people locally who really took that to heart and altered their decks, and it was such a good change for me as a person playing against those people. I wholeheartedly approve of my opponents pulling all of their ramp out and playing one spell a turn. Like at the root level, I do think people can sometimes overvalue how important ramp is to a deck. But to say that you just shouldn't ramp, and like you can do both things. You can hit all your land drops and ramp. It's not like a binary. You're not forced to choose between one or the other.
Sculpt your ramp around your mana curve and around when you want to cast your commander. Yeah. Don't run ramp at the expense of hitting your land drops. Yeah. Like, would I rather hit my land drop than play a ramp spell and not hit my land drop? Like, obviously, I'd rather hit my land drop. But I do think, on average, good decks do both of those things.
Yep.
Like, it's definitely a good invitation to make sure that you're thinking critically about your deck's relationship to ramp. But for me, of the deck building foibles that commander players are likeliest to commit, not running enough lands is a higher foible for me. Not running enough card advantage, that's a higher concern for me. Not running enough interaction is a higher concern for me.
Yeah.
I would be personally hesitant to take for granted that I will definitely curve out every time without being disrupted. And the reliable thing about ramp is that it often will help me keep up with some of the things that my opponents will eventually get up to.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this just goes back to people need to play more lands in general, because I see so many, like I'll see people asking for feedback. What do you think of my deck? I'm like, well, you're only playing 32 lands and your curve starts at 6. Like that absolutely is a recipe for failure.
Yeah.
I mean, I can certainly agree that there are some decks that will need it less than others. In my like reanimation decks, for instance, because in that deck, the whole point is that I'm cheating mana costs. A treasure deck is already making plenty of its own stuff there. So a lot of extra ramp would make you flood more easily. An elves deck, a whole bunch of the creatures already are doing ramp on their own, but those feel a lot more like exceptions than rules, in my opinion. And when you have a decent number of lands to guarantee that you're hitting your drops and also some acceleration points in your deck, I find that helps you get to the cool spells faster, but not just that, it also helps you recover from setbacks as well and like rebuild faster after someone wipes the board, for instance. So yeah, I am still playing what I consider to be a healthy amount of mana acceleration index, and I try to make sure that those mana acceleration points are customized to what that deck needs most of all. That's probably the bigger point for me here.
I think we've all had this experience too, where like you sat down to play a game and you've hit your ramp spells early and you've been able to like feel like you're playing ahead of everybody else. I'm doing this sooner than everybody else. I'm doing more of these things faster than everybody else. The game goes really well. You win. You shuffle up. You go to play the next game, and you hit none of those things. And someone else hits all of those things, and they are playing a turn ahead of you, and they're playing twice as many things, and they are doing all those things that you aren't able to do at the same pace they're doing. And again, like Joey, you're right. You can do it poorly, right? Not every deck needs as much ramp as some other decks do. You need to tweak it for what your deck and what your playing experience is. But like so if the argument, if we're going to focus on a portion of the argument that says far too many decks are running ramp, I definitely think some decks are maybe running too much ramp or the wrong kinds of ramp or doing it in a way that doesn't mesh with the deck's play style or their personal play style or the bracket they're in or whatever. But I think there's a lot of things that are useful in ramp. You can ramp and also curve out. It's not a if or choice.
Yeah, play more lands, people. You should probably be playing more lands. Like if you're playing ramp instead of a good land base, then yeah, that's a mistake. But it's good to make room for the both. They're both important.
Yeah, I mean, my most recent deck that I built is the commander costs 2 mana. I'm still running 37 lands because I need those in order to cast everything else that's in my decks. Like, because you still need resources once your commander's on the battlefield. It's so deck dependent that just making a blanket statement is really hard for me to co-sign.
Being able to double spell later in the game is very important. It's nice.
Super powerful. Yeah.
And again, to recover from setback, to pay that command tax after your commander card moves, stuff like that. Yeah. Anyway, we'll move on to our next one here. I love this. This is great. Carson, one of our Discord members here, said, hot take, too many people play commander like it's 4-player solitaire. I agree with this so hard I made a whole video about it, about how commander players need to stop doing this. 100% agree, right on the money. I really like this take a whole lot. That's just me, though. Where are you guys?
So there's a couple different ways to interpret this, and I'm not entirely sure what way Carson is saying this. There are definitely people that look at it like 4-player solitaire in that they don't want you to interact or stop them from doing their thing. And that's particularly frustrating when the thing that you're stopping them from doing is winning the game immediately by casting some broken spell or commander. Don't be surprised when someone stops you from winning the game because they want to win the game. That shouldn't be something that you are upset at or surprised or confused about.
Yeah, I mean, interaction points are what make this game interesting. Like, does that mean I want everyone to play nothing but removal? No, that's a whole different sentence. I am saying, though, that if you are my opponent, I expect you to mess with me and to try and stop me. I played against a Gishath player a while back, and I nuked his Mirari's Wake to stop him from playing his commander early. I didn't lock him out of the game all game. I didn't nuke everything that he played. I just identified that his important eggs were all in that one basket, so I sniped it. And then he stalled out in that game, and he couldn't get back in. And he himself was like, yeah, 100% perfect move, great play, you got me good. And I think that's a great and healthy attitude. And it was also a really healthy game. Like, interaction points are what makes this game interesting.
Yeah.
We're all not here just playing with ourselves. We're at a table together, and that means interaction.
Yeah. Well, and this point that you guys are making kind of flows into another point that our user Dan Fenton had. They said just in general, people, myself included, themselves included, not myself too, yes, but people are just bad at judging how powerful their deck is, which, yeah, I very much agree, because if people were better or just were more real about how they evaluate their own decks, they're going to be able to see those moments, like you said, Joey, where, okay, yeah, if my Gishath lands, it is a problem. And just people need to be more okay with being the problem in a game. Like, if you have these powerful cards that must be responded to, acknowledge that to yourself first. I don't think this is a hot take at all, that just people should be better at evaluating their own decks.
Jumping in for a quick point of clarity here, I don't think our patron Dan here is saying that players should be better about it, but rather that understanding power levels of a deck is actually sometimes a difficult skill. That's my takeaway here, at least. That, like, yeah, when you do exciting plays, for instance, that's the kind of thing that can get your blinders up and make you not realize the power level of the thing that you're doing. Or sometimes players will like perceive opposing decks as being more powerful than they actually are. Stuff like that can happen. Like Dan includes himself in his own statement here, really wisely, I think, saying that people are bad at judging power level because it's more of just an acknowledgement that this is the kind of thing that actually takes more practice than perhaps people realize or acknowledge in typical breezy conversation.
I'm going to go back to keep beating this point over and over because it's I think just a giant problem in Commander in general. And where people go wrong with this very frequently is what's in the command zone. And they look at it, they're like, well, this is just a slightly modified precon. Like, it's an Ashling deck. Ashling Limitless is a crazy powerful commander. And if you made changes to that deck and you made any basic changes that weren't terrible, if you looked at EDHREC and like, oh, that makes sense, and put 10 cards in there, a deck is already really strong, and that commander is so good that as long as your changes weren't like insane, you've just made that a really strong bracket 3 deck accidentally. And that's where I think people really mess up. They're like, well, this is just a brand new deck. It's a slightly modified precon. Like, precon commanders are so good nowadays.
Not all precons are created equal, though. Like, you have to be real with yourself that, like, oh my goodness, this Ashling precon goes hard in the paint and just will dunk on people's faces. You just be real with yourself.
If your commander is one of the 5 most popular commanders from any set in the last 2 years, your deck's stronger than you think it is. If you've made like reasonable changes to that deck, it's better than you think it is because the commander is so powerful.
Well, the Ashling players are up against the likes of Ureni the Unwritten cheating dragons onto the field, and High Perfect Morcant preventing people from ever keeping a bunch of creatures in play. I mean, right? Like that. This is a complicating factor. If every commander is kill on sight, is not that some form of balance technically?
Sure.
Like, if it's no wonder that players are drawn to like powerful and exciting stuff in the command zone just to keep up with what's across the table from them. If everyone is playing something busted, there is technically balance in that in some ways. Like, I agree, it doesn't take some huge overhaul to make the Ashling precon great, but I also think sometimes players try to upgrade a deck, and unfortunately sometimes wind up making a deck worse in those pursuits because everyone's still at various stages of learning how the game works. And like, I certainly agree insofar as the command zone is a fundamentally broken rule, and powerful commanders make a bigger impact on the game than powerful cards in the 99. And also that Wizards has like an unfortunate and disturbing habit of making a lot of commanders that solve their own math equations. I agree with those underlying points, absolutely. But also, Dana, you who never play popular commanders, we've seen you're still winning over 40% of your games each year in our data episodes, right?
Sure.
Which one is more dangerous? Dana with an obscure commander and he's won over 40% of his games every year, or a person with an Ashling deck or a Jodo the Unifier deck that they're still figuring out how it works, right? There are some concerning trends with how Magic and how certain commanders are designed over time. Yeah, sure. With regards to these specific hot takes, these specific points, I come back again to that idea of it actually being sometimes a difficult skill to figure out power levels because we each have different blind spots, and it is a skill that requires some practice. But also, not everyone has time, as we said earlier. So it is also like fine if some people don't want to practice that and just want to play with something that looks exciting.
Sure.
Yeah, well, and even back to the original points too about people are playing it like Solitaire and they're just kind of trying to stay in their lanes. You can't afford to stay in your own lane either. Like, if I'm sitting down to a pod with Ashling and Ureni and all these other high-powered commanders, I have to go in expecting that I need to be proactive about interacting with other people, so I can't just sit there by myself and kind of do whatever and play this bracket 1 deck against even a bad Ashling precon.
This discussion about solitairing reminds me of another hot take that I've seen floating out around there before. This isn't one that was submitted by our patrons. This is a different take that I've seen of some players saying that pinpoint removal is bad because it's not a 1-for-1. You have 3 opponents, so it means you're technically down on card advantage. and I think I'm just going to speak for all of us when I say that our games would get a whole lot easier if our opponents were not running efficient pinpoint spot removal.
Yes.
I would be as happy to see that as Dana was when his opponents stopped playing ramp.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just kind of as an extra flourish on the conversation about solitairing.
Yeah.
I would argue that if you want your decks to be better and if you want your games to be more enjoyable, slightly increasing the amount of interaction points that you have in your deck is going to make for more dynamic gameplay. Mm-hmm. Don't just think that because you have Swords and Path, you're all good. You could probably stand to play some more, and it's fun to get creative with them. There are a lot of very clever instants out there, from spell redirection effects to really cool fog effects, for instance. Anyway, though, I think, guys, we'll move to our last hot take here, which is one that got some good laughs in the Discord here. Comes to us from Captain Happy Hands. Hey, Andrew. Hot take: it's better not to participate than to play in 5-player games. And then 100%. There was also a follow-up on there it is. I expected that.
You don't need to read the rest. I'm agreeing.
Well, and so there was a follow-up on that from Woo Burger King in our Discord, who said, hot tick amendment, play star format, which is a variation, and it makes the games go faster. And that is a slight format variant where you have just 2 opponents as opposed to all 4 of your opponents. Kind of modifies the game rules in a small way. But yeah, how do we feel about 5-player games as opposed to the typically expected 4-player games?
I would rather chop a finger off at the knuckle like I'm doing a loyalty test to join the Yakuza than I would play a 5-player game.
Oh, wow.
So I remember the first time that we all got together in person. It was GP Kansas City about 10 years ago, almost at this point. And we looked over and I saw Dana. He had said, I'm going to go play this 5-player game. I'll be back in a little bit. A little bit was an understatement. Because I looked over about 2 hours later, all 5 players were still in the game, and I just saw the joy of life leaving Dana's eyes.
I remember
just
that.
Cold, dead eyes, like zombies had more life and joy than Dana felt in that moment. 5-player games, and maybe this is a little bit different. I know that people have like their ways of getting around that, but that still introduces a whole nother player, a whole nother set of variables, no matter what subset of rules you're playing. Like I have learned my lesson. I have played enough 5-player games. I would rather let the other 4 people have their fun, and then I'll go find another pod. I despise 5-player games.
And you can see how I got out of that game right here. That's how it finally ended.
Wild. This is funny. I don't have quite a strong opinion here, I guess. Like 5-player games, I agree, can certainly take too long. But even other like variation proposals, like the star variant, sometimes those end up feeling really short to me because they are limiting you from, instead of having 3 opponents, to just 2 people. There are, complicating factors in that with the star format where you also have allies and things like that. But those sometimes end up being like not quite as fast as the 3-player game, but sometimes close to it. I do try to avoid a 5-player if there are, if that's it. Like if there's an option, yeah, I want to avoid it, but sometimes I can't avoid it and I don't end up minding it. Another variation we do sometimes is like a hidden roles thing, secret partners, or some people play like a kingdom variant type of thing. But I found myself in a whole lot more 5-player games than maybe some other folks have. And I've learned to just like, yeah, okay, go with the flow about it. But I have also seen games take a really long time. So like, I understand where you're coming from. It's not like you're crazy for that. I totally get it, but it just hasn't hit me in the same way, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, Joey, you're I got it. Yeah, Joey, well, you're a more patient man than I for sure, because I've just had so many bad experiences, and I know people feel like, well, you should just play the game anyways. Like I can get joy from watching 4 people play more than I would get joy from playing in a 5-player game. I know myself. I would just rather let that game just happen with 4 players. It's a tried and true standard. I don't see any reason to mess with the formula.
Well, Matt, of course I have more patience for it than you. I have a lot of patience. I've had to put up with y'all's dad jokes for years now, right?
Like 8 years now, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, man. I want to extend a huge thank you to our patrons for submitting hot takes. There were more than we could get to in a single episode. This was really fun. And maybe there's room for us to go even further with even more, but there's a lot of fun stuff here. It was really fun to go through and react to some of these. I imagine that there are a lot more other sentiments out there that people have. So leave your comments below about your hot takes about format direction, card design, stuff like that. It's been really cool to see where people are at with Commander. But I do think, guys, we do got to call this episode to a close. So if our listeners want to find us online, where is it that they can locate you?
So you can find me on pretty much any social media platform, Blue Sky, Instagram, whatever else you want to do. It's all going to be the same at Mathimus55. That's MATHIMUS55. And don't forget, we are so happy to work with Dragon Shield to protect our own decks. You can know that you can count on them to protect your decks as well. And when you head to dragonshield.com, make sure you use promo code EDHREC in all lowercase to get yourself a little discount, and it lets them know that we sent you as well.
And you can find me online at Dana Roach. I'm writing articles for EDHREC, and I'm doing some social media stuff for Architect, where you can find me and my cat on Instagram and TikTok. And you can find all of us together at patreon.com/EDHRECast.
And you can find me everywhere online, from Instagram to Blue Sky at Joseph M. Schultz. And of course, you can find the cast online at EDHRECast. Listeners, we'll be back at you next week with more data and insights. But until next time, remember, EDHREC your deck before you wreck your deck.